Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review for both Dawnshard and Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. Starting with Dawnshard, because I know a lot of people have wondered if you have to read Dawnshard before you read Rhythm of War. A lot of the things that are touched on in Dawnshard are definitely important for the greater cosmere, just if you're aware of the cosmere and you know of all the intricacies that Sanderson has laid out throughout his various different series, you can start to see where some of these things are coming together, but I wouldn't say it plays the biggest role in the events of Rhythm of War. There are definitely parts where things are referenced, and chronologically it does take place before Rhythm of War, which is why it's probably a good idea to pick it up first. It follows Lopin and Rison, and they are tasked with looking into something to do with this mysterious island. Navani believes that there is an oath gate on this island, and so these characters are supposed to explore it. The Windrunners that try to go there, they end up losing their powers, so they've asked Rison to go, they've asked Lopin to accompany her, as well as Cord, who is Rock's daughter, so you do get to see these characters a little bit more. There's a lot of things touched on that are really fascinating, but as far as if you have to read it before Rhythm of War, I would recommend it. But I also understand for the people that are really just wanting to jump in, I kind of understand. Now jumping into Rhythm of War itself. If you need a refresher for the events of the first 3 books, I do have a recap video. I think it is helpful to remind yourself of what took place and to know where the characters are and what their goals are moving forward, because this book moves. It gets started right away. There is a time skip between Oathbringer and this one, which creates a very fast-paced beginning. The same way that the first 3 books have these magnificent endings that are so action-packed, this one starts that way, which is a great way to start it. You don't feel too lost by this time skip. You don't feel like there's this disconnect from the characters all of a sudden. You have no idea what they've been up to. You don't really get that. You pick up really quick and you take off, and then it kind of goes from there. I'll get more into the pacing in just a sec, but I do think that the setup contributes to what I feel was the best paced Stormlight Archive book so far. Without giving away specifics about their tasks, we essentially have 3 main groups in this one, made up of 2 characters each, one being a main character and one being a side character. So you see Shallan and Adolin tasked with something, you see Kaladin and Navani tasked with something, and then you see Dalinar and Yasna tasked with something. And I personally loved those pairings. I was not really expecting a Kaladin-Navani pairing. I think the other ones make sense, but that one was the one that was the most surprising to me. But I really liked it. At any given time, even if you're with one of the side characters, you're essentially with the main character too, because what's affecting the side character is affecting the main character. But also, you're with the main characters. You're with them more, I feel, than in any other Stormlight Archive book. And in this case, you have minimal flashback chapters, first off, which are in the point of view of Eshonai and Venli, but there aren't very many. The first half of the book doesn't have any, really, so that just contributes again to the pacing feeling faster and getting to spend more time with the main characters. I think Venli and Eshonai are interesting to a lot of people, but at the same time, I think it's a good opportunity to explore the Parshendi, the Parshmen, but it's not necessarily the thing that I personally find myself really emotionally gripped by. I think that's maybe true for a lot of fans as well. But I almost feel like Sanderson knew that, because even when you do go to the backstory chapters, they're really short. They're really short, and like I said, they don't really start coming up until about halfway in the book. And on top of that, when you have interludes, there are about 3 chapters, and they're always really short. And I really liked basically all the interludes in this one. In previous books, sometimes I'm like, who is this? I don't care. And in this one, I was always like, ooh, what is this? And I was always really fascinated by the interludes. I mean, Syl gets an interlude, and who doesn't love Syl? So the backstory chapters and the interludes are short, and there are far fewer of them than there were in the previous books. So that means you have literally more page time with our main characters, and having these various different pairings and these tasks made it so that no matter what, I always wanted to turn the page and I always wanted to know what was going to happen next. Another thing that I thought contributed to me wanting to constantly turn the page is that you, when you are with a given character or their pair of characters, you are going to find that this particular Stormlight Archive book spends more time, I thought, with characters at any one given time. So when you're with Kaladin and Navani, you're with them for a very long time. When you're with Shallan and Adolin, same thing, and then same, of course, for Dalinar and Yasna. I do think that you spend the most amount of time with Kaladin and Navani, which worked well for me. One, because I'm a huge Kaladin fan, and also because their plotline to me was the most interesting, the one with the highest stakes, the one that I was like, oh my gosh, what are they gonna do? How are they gonna get out of this? What's gonna happen? My poor babies, are they gonna be okay? The chapter sizes also contributed to this one feeling faster paced, because when things were going, the chapters were short. Something that I thought happened that it's always going to be dependent on what you like, but in Oathbringer, I found that there were times when the paragraphs would be brief, and then you'd switch, and then a brief paragraph, and then switch, and 2 sentences, and then switch. And some people are going to love the rate at which you're changing perspectives, and it's going to raise the suspense, and it's going to make it feel somewhat cinematic because you're viewing all these different things at once. But I definitely felt like this one, it zeroed in a little bit stronger when you were with somebody, but the chapters would be shorter. So then you're like, oh my gosh, and then you'd turn the page and you'd read a few pages, and then that chapter would end, and you're like, but what's going to happen now? And then you would turn the page. I think that the beginning, everybody has talked about at this point, I feel like, if you've read the preview chapters, you know. The beginning is very high stakes, very action-packed. But then what about the rest of it? Is it as action-packed as the beginning? I think it is as equally tense. There's a lot of tension. I'll get to go into this more in the spoilery chats, but I think that the tension is very personal, and it's kind of more closed in an intimate tension, if you will. Instead of these really epic stakes, which there are, because if things go wrong with these small things, that's it. It ruins all the big stuff. So what seemed like something shouldn't have been that big of a deal is almost like an oversight of, oh my gosh, that will be it. That's it. Everything else won't matter if this particular thing goes wrong. Those stakes, too, are established well with the world building. You are constantly wondering what is going to happen. How do things work? The clock is ticking. If the characters can't figure out this thing, then, I keep saying, that's it. It's over. And so the clock is ticking kind of creates that tension. And then on top of that, it really does kind of come down to a select group. It also made for more compelling interactions between villain and hero. And it's like every single time that there would be these characters facing off, I was always so invested and I was so intrigued, because sometimes it would be a quiet, just these two talking, right? There'd be an enemy and a villain having a conversation, and there's just so many little things in this conversation that are so fascinating to explore, and I weirdly find myself understanding the enemy's side, but at the same time I'm like, but also our heroes. And then you have some enemies that there's basically like a different degree. There's the enemies that I feel for, and I kind of want them to just pair up with the good guys and everybody to be good, and then you have other enemies that you're like ultimate evil, all the middle fingers to Moash, like those sorts of things. And you also get this other villain that I can't really talk about too much, but oh my gosh, there's this scene, there's like this hallway scene of trying to avoid this enemy because the hero cannot face them at that time, which also is the best when you know the hero will lose if they get caught, and so you're like, don't get caught, right? And it's just the tension it creates. There's this whole scene where there's characters like trying to avoid this enemy, and I could just visualize the enemy walking past and the character holding their breath, and I was holding my breath. That kind of a scene, oh, it was done so well, and that kind of stuff. The whole book has scenes like that. And then interspersed you have Dalinar and Yasna and Shallan and Adolin and Kaladin and Navani all having great character moments. I can't obviously talk too much about character arcs or character growth because, you know, if you say like, Kaladin had such amazing growth in this book, then of course all the fans are going to be like, I guess he said the fourth ideal. So I can't talk about whether the characters' arcs resulted in the way I wanted, or if, oh my gosh, I was so happy by this, or oh, I was hard. You can't talk about it at this point because there's so many theories and speculation, but I think the arcs were done well. There's one other thing I want to touch on before jumping into what are potential negatives for people, and that would be the mental health that is explored in this book. So that's something that's been touched on in the previous books. Not just touched on, I think it has been explored very well in the previous books, more so than I've seen from a lot of other fantasy books, and I have absolutely loved seeing it, but this one takes it to the next level, the emphasis on mental health and how a fantastical world who doesn't really have any indication of how they're supposed to treat people who have these issues, if this is even actually an issue or if it's just something that's all in people's heads. The way that that is explored in this particular book, I think is so well done, and I so appreciated it. And for some people, maybe those moments are going to feel slower to the other events, because of course it's, if you're thinking about, if something maybe not great about having constantly being in battle and seeing people die, that might actually be affecting my brain. So those moments are obviously not the same as flying through the sky fighting enemies, but it's that kind of stuff that makes the characters real, that makes them feel so human. And I so appreciated those moments, and they never, to me, felt slow. They did not feel like an interruption to the pace. It felt like a fantastic moment to explore what it is to be a person. And I feel like so many times fans of fantasy kind of joke about the horrendous things that are happening and how characters just kind of brush it off and keep on going. And we actually sit and take a sec to explore the toll that that would have on a person. Now getting, though, into the things that some people might not love about this entry. I touched on already that I definitely think this kind of was a return to Kaladin a little bit. I think that the focus was on him a little more than the other main characters. However, I know that not everybody loves Kaladin the way that I and some of the other fans do. So if you're not the biggest fan of Kaladin, he does not take up the whole book. It's not like the other characters are completely out of the picture. I just do think that if you really love those other characters, that might be a downside a little bit for you. Also, I think having this fantastic pacing makes the ending feel less extreme than the previous endings of the Stormlight Archive books. Some people might want it to be even bigger. I didn't. I was like, I hope the ending of this one is different in some way. Is it fast-paced? Is it intense? Yes. It's just not as big, which I actually like. I think that that was a good contrast to the previous book. I think it was a new flavor as far as the endings go for these ones, but if you're looking for the biggest, most grand battle in the history of the cosmere, I don't know that you're gonna get that. The other negatives are very specific to me, and it's very likely that you completely won't agree, but for me, one of the plot lines, I thought the way it was resolved was a little convenient, maybe a little easy. And then the last thing is that because of the time skip between the books, there were a couple of things that I really wanted to see that it turned out occurred between the books, and these were just scenes that I was really looking forward to seeing that I didn't really get to see. You kind of see the effects of those things, but you don't really see those scenes themselves. I think it worked out. It's not a huge negative for me. It's not like I'm like, dropping a star or something like that, but I was kind of like, man, I kind of wanted to see that. But I understand why we didn't, because we needed the characters to be in a certain place in order for the book to take off in the direction it does, because the stuff that happens is super important, and like I said, it just goes. It goes really fast, so I get why we didn't see those scenes. I just kind of wanted to. I can't wait to get to do the spoiler chats and get to see all of your spoilery thoughts on this one. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.